Which immigrants have to register with the federal government? Hi, I'm Jim Hacking, immigration lawyer practicing law throughout the United States out of our offices in St. Louis, San Diego, and Washington, D.C. When President Trump took office on January 20th, he issued an executive order that directed the Department of Homeland Security to revive an alien registration requirement. That's what they call it. They love to call immigrants aliens. They like to make them sound foreign. And as of April 11th, 2025, immigrants in the United States were supposed to register with the Department of Homeland Security. And there's a list of people who don't have to register. But if you are on the list and the government wants you to apply and register, then you're going to have to do that. Now, the rule doesn't have a deadline to do this, so that's an interesting hook, an interesting angle. There's no deadline to register. I assume the deadline will come later. But let's talk about the people who don't have to register. So lawful permanent residents don't have to register. People who are paroled into the United States, they do not have to register even if their parole has expired. Anyone who is granted a non-immigrant visa at the State Department and has an I-94 is not required to register. Anybody who came on an immigrant visa, they too are not required to register. If you are in removal, you don't have to register with the government under the alien registration requirement. If you have a work authorization card, so if there's any reason why you are receiving an EAD, an employment authorization document, you don't have to register. If you applied for an I-485 before, if you applied to adjust your status, even if that case was denied, you don't have to register either. And then anyone with a border crossing card. So anybody who falls into those categories, green card holders, parolees, non-immigrant visa holders, immigrant visa holders, anybody in removal, anybody with a work card, anybody who applied for a green card before, even if they got denied, and people with border crossing cards, they do not have to register. Anybody else, if they're over the age of 14, they are required to register. You have to open an online USCIS account, and you have to complete the form, which is called the G325R. It's an electronic form. Everything's done electronically, so there isn't a paper version of this. And then once you register, you have to carry proof of your registration. And if you don't, there's consequences that we'll talk about at the end of the video. So let's talk about the kinds of people who probably are supposed to register under the rules as set forth in the ARR. Anybody who entered without inspection, that is, anybody who the government did not have the right or the decision to allow them into the United States, anybody who crossed the border, anybody who came in without being inspected by a government official, that's called EWI, entered without inspection. Any of those people, you're supposed to register under the rule. Any Canadians who came through a land port of entry and don't have an I-94, they're supposed to register. Anybody who has deferred action or TPS and don't have evidence of prior registration, they're going to have to register. So let's talk about what happens if you register, and let's talk about what happens if you don't register. It is expected that the government, and they have said flatly that they intend to use the registration requirement in a few ways. One is to just simply start finding people to deport. Now, news reports indicate that not a lot of people have taken the Trump administration up on their offer to require registration and to register, so most people are not registering. Now, if you don't register, you could be subject to a fine of $5,000 and 6 months in jail. If you don't carry proof of your registration, you could be fined $5,000 for that and spend 30 days in jail. And if you don't update your address within 10 days, you can spend 30 days in jail and or receive a fine of $200. So it's pretty stiff consequences. But because the government has made it clear that they want to use this tool to help deport people, and I think they're also going to use it to deny future immigration benefits. So let's say that you were in the United States, you didn't register, and then you marry a U.S. citizen, but you've never registered, then we can see a scenario where they say, well, you're not eligible to adjust because you didn't follow the law, you're not a good person, we're not going to give you a green card under our discretion. So most likely that will be litigated. But it's a big problem for people, and I want you to understand that you should not register for this program without talking to an immigration attorney. You need to understand the rules in your case, how it applies to you, what effects it might have on you if you register, what are the consequences if you don't. You need to make a good decision here, and I'm still expecting that this program is going to be litigated. Some advocacy groups filed a lawsuit to challenge this in court, but they got kicked out of court based on standing. That is, the court didn't find that they themselves or going to be harmed. So I expect that these groups will be back with people who either had to register, or maybe it'll get litigated later when they start denying benefits for people who failed to register, or start incarcerating people. This is all based on old laws from the 1940s and 50s. It hasn't been fully vetted yet. We'll see what happens. But in the meantime, as I mentioned, if you're thinking about registering, or if you fall into one of those categories of people who do have to register, mostly those who entered without inspection, you need to talk to a competent immigration attorney before you go through this process. If you have questions, we're not actually handling registrations, but if you have cases that go along with that, if you want our help filing for your green card or your I-130 or asylum or citizenship, feel free to give us a call at 314-961-8200. You can email us info@hackingimmigrationlaw.com. If you're looking for free resources, or if you want to talk about the alien registration requirement, you can come join me on my YouTube show. Look for the Immigration Answers Show and subscribe to us on YouTube. You can also find us on Facebook. And speaking of Facebook, we have a Facebook group called Immigrant Home. We'd love to have you join us there. There's over 15,000 immigrants in that group going through the process, and we see questions like what to do about this in there all the time. Finally, if you're not following us on TikTok, please do @Immigration Hacking, and we'll see you on the next video.